Hell's Angels love to kill people up front. They liked coming up close and popping a guy in the head.
He had something like 160 bodies piled up. It was a bloodbath.
It would happen every day. But in my time, if a guy would have told me I'm going to hurt you, I'm going to kill you or something, I would have broken his jaw right there.
On a quiet morning in March 1985, 5 high-ranking Hells Angels were invited to a unity meeting at a clubhouse in Lennoxville, Quebec. They expected a discussion about club business and drug territory. Instead, they walked into a slaughterhouse. Their own brothers, men they had ridden with for years, opened fire, executing them in cold blood before wrapping their bodies in sleeping bags, chaining them to weight plates, and dumping them into the St. Lawrence River. This wasn't a hit by a rival gang. This was a purge. The Lennoxville massacre didn't just shock Canada, it ignited a decade of fire and blood that would leave over 160 people dead, including innocent children. From the ashes of this betrayal rose a man who would become the most feared criminal in Canadian history, Maurice Mom Boucher. Today, we're going inside the Quebec Biker War, a conflict so brutal it forced the government to rewrite the laws of the land. To understand the war, you have to understand why the Hells Angels turned on themselves. In the early 80s, the Laval chapter of the Hells Angels was out of control. Led by the legendary hitman Yves Apache Trudeau, they were effective, but they were also garbage in the eyes of the bosses. They were heavy drug users, they were sloppy, and they were bringing too much heat from the police. The Filthy Five, the victims of the purge, were seen as a liability to the club's bottom line. When the massacre happened, it sent shockwaves through the underworld. One man, Salvatore Cazzetta, was so disgusted by the betrayal of the biker code that he refused to join the Hells Angels. Instead, he formed his own group, the Rock Machine. But while Cazzetta chose honor, another man chose power. Maurice Boucher didn't care about the bodies in the river. He saw a vacancy at the top, and he was ready to fill it. Maurice Boucher wasn't your typical biker. Born into a violent, alcoholic home, he was a 9th grade dropout with a rap sheet longer than a highway. But he had 2 things that made him lethal: charisma and micromanagement. He earned the nickname Mom, not because he was kind, but because he mothered over every detail of his hits. By 1986, he was a full-patch Hells Angel. By the early 90s, he was the president of the Montreal chapter. Boucher's vision was simple: total monopoly. He didn't want to share the drug trade with the mafia, the street gangs, or the Rock Machine. He famously walked into a rival's bar and shot him dead in front of witnesses, knowing that the fear he projected would keep anyone from testifying. He didn't just want to be a biker, he wanted to be the CEO of crime. He established the Nomads, an elite, officer-only chapter that answered only to him. They were the shock troops of his empire. The war begins. The tension snapped in 1994. With Salvatore Cazzetta in prison on drug charges, Boucher saw his chance to crush the Rock Machine. He sent his men to every drug turf in Montreal with a simple ultimatum: buy your product from the Hells Angels or die. The Rock Machine didn't fold. They formed an alliance called the United Front, joining forces with street gangs and a shadowy group of businessmen known as the Dark Circle who funded the war chest. What followed was carnage. On July 13, 1993, the first shot was fired when a Hells Angel associate was executed. This ignited a tit-for-tat cycle of bombings and drive-bys that turned Montreal into a combat zone. The violence reached a horrific peak when a car bomb intended for a drug dealer exploded, killing 11-year-old Daniel Desrochers while he played in a nearby park. To fuel his offensive, Boucher utilized the Alliance, a network that coordinated strikes with military precision. He didn't just target rivals, he aimed for total psychological domination, deploying over 80 bombs across the province. The public was finished with a cool biker image. They wanted blood, and the government was finally forced to declare a state of emergency to stop the bodies from piling up in the streets. The corruption and the rat. Boucher was winning because he owned the city. He had police officers, judges, and prison guards on his payroll. Every time the police launched a Wolverine task force, Boucher knew about it before the ink was dry on the warrants. But he didn't count on Danny Kane. Kane was a hang-around who felt used by the club. He became a double agent, feeding the police information while rising through the ranks of the Hells Angels puppet clubs. Through Kane, the police realized the depth of the rot, that the Montreal police were essentially Boucher's private security. Boucher, feeling the pressure, decided to strike at the heart of the justice system itself. He ordered the assassination of 2 prison guards, Diane Lavigne and Pierre Rondeau, to intimidate the courts. The murders of the guards were Boucher's biggest mistake. It triggered Operation Harm, led by investigator André Bouchard. They found a weak link, Stéphane Gaudas Gagné. Gagné was the triggerman for the guard killings. Under intense interrogation, he flipped. He pointed the finger directly at Mom Boucher as the one who ordered the hits. The first trial in 1998 was a total circus. Despite overwhelming evidence, Boucher was acquitted, a verdict that sent shockwaves through the Canadian justice system. It was later revealed that the jury had been living in absolute terror, haunted by the reach of the nomads. Boucher walked out of the courtroom, a hero to the underworld, smugly smoking a cigar for the cameras. But the state refused to back down. They appealed the impossible acquittal, citing blatant jury tampering, and a historic second trial was ordered. This time, the court was a fortress. In 2002, the untouchable was finally touched. Maurice Mom Boucher was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years. The King of the North had finally lost his crown. The Quebec Biker War changed Canada forever. It led to the creation of the anti-gang law, Bill C-95, which made it a crime to simply belong to a criminal organization. Boucher died in prison in 2022, lonely and stripped of his filthy few patches. The war he started over pride and territory ended with his empire in ruins and his name synonymous with the darkest chapter in Canadian history. The Hells Angels are still in Canada, but they ride in the shadow of the Lennoxville Purge and the ghost of Mom Boucher, a reminder that in the world of the 1%, the only thing more dangerous than your enemy is your brother. The legend of Mom Boucher serves as a grim reminder of the chaos that ensues when organized crime operates without limits. His fall from the peak of power to a lonely prison cell marked the end of an era, but the scars of the Quebec Biker War remain etched in the city's history. As the shadows of the North continue to shift, one thing is certain: the price of supremacy is often paid in blood. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe as we continue to pull back the curtain on the world's most dangerous criminal empires.